Hey everybody, what's going on? Ghost Dragon 1182 here, and I am here to talk about 1979's Alien, directed by Ridley Scott, starring Sigourney Weaver as Ellen Ripley, Tom Skerritt as Dallas, Veronica Cartwright as Lambert, Harry Dean Stanton as Brett, John Hurt as Kane, Yaphet Kotto as Parker, and Ian Holm as Ash. And I'm going to butcher this name, but Balaji Badejo as the alien. With a story by Dan O'Bannon and Ronald Shusett, Alien actually saw a lot of... it took a while to get it off the ground. Dan O'Bannon kind of conceptualized everything a few years prior to the film actually being made. And one of the things he struggled with was how to get the alien on the ship. And I can't remember exactly where he got the idea from, but basically it might have been Ronald Shusett, but I'm not 100% sure, so don't rip me up in the comments. But he was given the idea of, like, basically one of the crew members being raped, and that's how the alien gets into the ship, and because they were impregnated during, like, space rape or whatever. His initial script had some problems. Originally, the alien, the Chestburster scene, I think, was, like, it wasn't until, like, page 90 of the script, which is unheard of. That's like roughly one page in a script represents about a minute of movie, so an hour and a half into the movie and you're getting your Chestburster scene. So David Giler and Walter Hill, two of the producers on the film, kind of rewrote the script, and for a while there, Dan O'Bannon kind of was under the impression that they were trying to squeeze him out, not give him credit for it. And if you watch any of the behind the scenes footage or making of the film, he was pretty bitter about that. Obviously, that's not the case. He received story credit, but in his kind of sort of made amends with it because once he saw the finished film, he was going, okay, I get it, and he liked it. But watching him talk about it, he was pretty fucking ripping pissed for a while. Understandably so, if you're trying to get... if you think you're being squeezed out of a film that you're trying to get off the ground. The original title he had, too, wasn't even Alien. It was Star Beast. Dan O'Bannon's original concept for the film came from working on projects with John Carpenter. Dark Star in 1974 was a sci-fi comedy that started out as a student project but got turned into a feature film. And sometime during the production, O'Bannon kind of thought that the premise of the movie would work better as a horror film. So he started work on a script called Star Beast, which would eventually become Alien. Dark Star was a commercial failure, but Alejandro Jodorowsky, which is another name I'm probably butchering, had acquired the rights to Frank Herbert's Dune, invited O'Bannon to help him with the adaptation on that. So O'Bannon sold like everything he owned and moved to Paris. While working on that project, O'Bannon met people like Chris Foss, Ron Karb, H.R. Giger, and using them, when the project fell through, he took that creative team over to his Star Beast project. And he used much of the designs that were already created for Dune, and then Ridley Scott, who was actually probably one of the few people in the world that liked Dark Star, agreed to direct the film. And that was, in a nutshell, like the creative genesis for getting the team together for Alien. So once Ridley Scott was on board, he began storyboarding, and I think like he spent like $4 million just on storyboarding. He did the storyboards, had everything planned out, and they started the basic pre-production stuff. And having Ron Cobb design the Nostromo, H.R. Giger work on all of the alien structures and obviously the creature, created probably one of the best conflicting aesthetics in a film. Everything that Cobb built and designed for the Nostromo is very human, the touches that are in the film when it comes to the Nostromo are just a bunch of little things that add up, like in the opening shots when you see just like coffee cups lying around and duct tape on the leather of the seats because there's holes in them and cuts and things like that. Like, the Nostromo is designed to feel very kind of familiar, human, and lived in. Derelict spaceship, the alien itself, And the space jockey, because at the time they weren't called engineers, had very alien, nightmarish aesthetics to them that clashed so well with Cobb's designs that I don't think that film would have worked any other way by having one person design all of that stuff. When the crew lands on the planet and goes out and finds the derelict ship and they're inside of it, especially I wish I could be, back in 1979 seeing that movie for the first time, because I'm sure at the time there was nothing like that. And really, a lot of that is a testament to both creative people, Ron Cobb's work and Giger's especially. It's very timeless. Yes, you have stuff like the old CRT monitors and like the big clunky clicky keyboards on the mother console, but still, that stuff is like, that movie, because of those aesthetics and set designs and just the art direction in that movie, it holds up very well. 29 years later we're talking now, having Giger design the creature. There's not, in 2018, most people can see a bust or a sculpture or a painting or any kind of image or physical representation of the alien from that movie and know what it is. It was very unique. It's the design with the long phallic head and the second mouth coming out of the main mouth, and just everything about it it taps in the primal fears that I don't think people realize they have. Ridley Scott came across the Necronom painting and loved it, and that's the creature, and he approached Dan O'Bannon and the other people, the producers, and this is the design I want, and they're like, well, blah 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 blah, and like, no, this is the design, this is what I want, this is, and he pushed for it. If it wasn't for Ridley Scott, we probably would not have the creature that we do, because Fox they weren't real keen on getting Giger involved. So Giger came up with some designs, built a suit. There's so many documentaries on Alien. There's so much stuff that's talked about it. There's certain points that I don't feel like I need to get too in depth with. The creature design and Giger's whole process is one of them. Hell, if you own any DVD or Blu-ray copy of the film, you have the behind the scenes stuff, so we'll probably skip over. So one thing I do think is kind of funny, though, that I do want to mention is when Giger was on set, a lot of people, the crew and such, thought that he was kind of creepy, like a vampire, because he was always wearing black and very lightly spoken and kind of polite. If you ever watch interviews with him from around that time, and even later on in his life, he was always very well spoken, and his voice kind of does not match up with how he looks, I guess you could say, or but they just kind of had this, like, he was the creepy guy on set, and then like he brought his mother in the show, like, and everybody realized like he's not some kind of like evil dude from Sweden. But it's kind of cool though watching that stuff, because Giger was metal before there was a metal look. So the film begins with the camera just panning across space, with the title of the movie slowly forming in like this kind of hieroglyphic font. You see the Nostromo. You have some text explaining what the Nostromo is, and then you get a shot of the interior of the ship. Things are starting to come alive. Monitors are lighting up. Hallway lights are turning on. Getting a slow pan through the ship, kind of establishing that this thing's lived in. There's coffee cups that were left out. There's duct tape holding together holes and cuts in the leather sleeves in the pilot chairs. They cut through, and you kind of get the sense that this is a claustrophobic, tight space. There's a lot of corridors and hallways. It's not real big and wide open. Eventually coming across the crew being woken up from their hypersleep. They have a breakfast, kind of introduces you to each and every character that's in the crew. Not kind of establishing what they're there for. Right away, Parker and Brett are shown as being like, they're worried about their shares. Everybody's contracted and they're not all getting the same percentages, and Parker and Brett kind of feel like they do most of the manual labor. They deserve probably a little bit more than it sounds like baseline share that they're supposed to get out of this job, and making a point to argue their case. You then find out that they've been woken up from their hypersleep early because the ship's computer mother has intercepted a signal. They go back and forth as to whether it's a distress call, could it be an SOS. Ultimately, they have to go and investigate it because that's in their contracts. Parker brings up that they should just leave it be. They're not, they're truckers. They're space truckers. This isn't their job. And Dallas makes it clear that the company will not pay them because this is a clause in their contract that they have to go investigate this. So they get the ball rolling on getting the Nostromo detached from the refinery so that they can go and land on this planet. Another good example that this is not like your clean science fiction is that this is not a let's just zoom down to the planet and land. They're dealing with the curvature of the planet. They're cutting through the terrible storm in the atmosphere. When they do land, it's not even like a smooth landing. The ship jerks down hard. There's damage that ends up needing to be repaired that they estimate to take about 25 hours. This isn't just like you come down out of the sky, you land, you get out, do your thing, and get back in and go away. It makes it more believable. So, up until this point, this movie is paced very deliberately. Roger Ebert once said this movie establishes a mission before it takes you on an adventure. And that's pretty much how, this isn't something that just gets right to the point and gives you all this payoff with no build-up. There is a lot of build-up to the eventual events that transpire later in the movie. And the nice thing about this is you get the moments to get to know the crew. The first probably half hour, 45 minutes is fairly calm. The landing on the planet obviously isn't exactly calm, but it's when they get to the derelict ship is where the tension kind of just starts to ratchet. So they land. Dallas, Lambert, and Kane suit up, and they're going to go find this signal and see what's up. Interesting little behind-the-scenes tidbit. The spacesuits that they're wearing were not ventilated. So when you see condensation built up on the visors and on the characters, that's because that was from them breathing while they had the spacesuits on. They'd have to, in between takes, they'd have to try to cool off. I don't know exactly who, but there's rumors that some of them passed out. And when they complained about it, nobody really did anything about it. Until, for close-up shots, it was the adult actors, Tom Skerritt, Veronica Cartwright, John Hurt. For zoomed-out shots to kind of establish this grand sense of scale, Ridley Scott actually had smaller versions of the suits made that children could wear. One of the children being his child. And it wasn't until the kids started passing out while in these suits that finally the production team was like, maybe we should fucking do something about these suits so they quit passing out. So Dallas, Lambert, and Kane, they're all suited up. They're starting on their trek to the derelict ship. You kind of get to see how terrible and awful this place is, with the terrain being rocky and uneven, the endless, just constant windstorm. It's not a nice place. They eventually find the source of the signal. It's coming from a derelict ship. That's our first real glimpse into this alien world that H.R. Giger created for this movie, with this very weird kind of like horseshoe shaped, almost kind of like a bent bone-looking type of ship. And they proceed to find a way to get inside so they can see what's going on. They find a very large corpse of a space jockey. They weren't called engineers yet because Prometheus wasn't a thing. That was actually one of the shots when they zoom out after, if I remember correctly, the way it's shot, when you see Kane's hand come up and he pulls himself up on the platform, that close-up is of John Hurt. When it zooms out and you see the three characters and the big space jockey fossilized into his chair, that's a shot with the kids in the suits to make that look that much bigger. But they investigate the space jockey, and he's got this hole in his chest that's been blown out, like something exploded from inside of him, and you're kind of... Now the gears kind of start turning in your head, like, what's going on? What's that thing? It's enormous, and what could have put a hole in his chest like that? They find a hole in the ground that they decide to see, where this thing goes and what's in the chamber beneath it. So they lower Kane down into it, and that's where he finds just like this field full of eggs. This was one of the scenes too where they built the set. They originally built, I think, like 6 prop alien eggs, and Ridley Scott was like, no, I want more. So they built like around 100, and to make certain areas seem bigger, they did this on the Nostromo too, to make the hallways seem longer. And to make the egg chamber look bigger, they would strategically place mirrors that would reflect into each other and make these big but not enormous sets look even larger than they actually were. There's actually a few scenes, if you watch closely, you can see the reflection of the actors in the mirrors on in the Nostromo hallways specifically. But they lower Kane down in. He sees these eggs. There's like a blue mist over him. That originally Ridley Scott wanted to have like a skin or some kind of like membrane over the eggs that he would have to cut to go down into. But he breaks the mist layer and he goes in and he's investigating the egg. And people have complained that, like, he gets like right up on the egg and you can see something moving around inside of it, which was Ridley Scott's hands. Once the egg opens, he like sticks his face right over the top of it and looks inside. His curiosity and natural wonderment at something that you've never seen before probably got the best of him. And that's why he got so close to the egg, popped his head over it when it opened up. You're sitting there as a viewer watching it going, no, you don't need to go down in there. And then he kind of plops down in. You're like, okay, well, you don't need to touch anything. And he's looking at the egg and shining the light through it. And you see something moving around in it. And then when it opens up with the creepiest fucking noise possible when it opens, he's like, that's when, most people are like, get the fuck out of there. And he's kind of still like, hey, what's this? And looking around, and he peeks in. When that facehugger jumps out, man, that's something. In 1979, I'm sure there wasn't an ass in the seat that didn't jump at that scene. Because it's so sudden. He looks inside and it's kind of like got this undulating, I think it was like sheep's stomach or something that they stuffed in there. And then he's kind of looking and seeing what's going on, and that motherfucker's just like, brah! And fucking it jumps out. There's like this high-pitched squeal that they use for a sound effect, and it just latches on, and that's the end of that. Different things that they did behind the scenes to film that, though. Like I kind of briefly touched upon, when he shines the light into, like, through the egg, and you see the facehugger kind of flutter in there. That was Ridley Scott had his hands in the egg, and he like hooked his thumbs together, and he was fluttering his hands like that to kind of make it look like the facehugger in there moving around. The innards of the egg was, I'm not sure if it was sheep's stomach or something else, but I know it was like some guts and like tripe or something like that they got from a butcher shop and stuffed in there. Blew an air cannon from the bottom of it to kind of get the blech coming out of it and the facehugger coming out of it. And then it actually jumping up onto his face. They filmed it already on his face, pulled it off, and then reversed the film. That whole scene, that's where You kind of get a few clicks of the ratchet, and you know shit's about to go down. Thankfully, they didn't rehash coming back to the ship with Dallas and Lambert trying to drag Kane all the way back. They just show up back at the ship. They went in, Ripley asks what happened to Kane. Dallas is something's attached itself to his face. Just let us in. And she's, I'm not breaking quarantine. You know the rules, 24 hours for decontamination. Then you can come in. They argue back and forth because Dallas points out that Kane could die and he doesn't give a damn about the procedures. Let them in. It kind of establishes that there's probably a deeper connection there between Dallas and Kane. They've probably gone out quite a few times on missions together to recover refineries or whatever towing that they were doing. There's probably a friendship that's been there for quite a while. Ripley she's adamant. She's by the book. She's not letting them in. And this is kind of where you see that Ripley's probably more of the level-headed character out of all the different members of the crew. And as they're going back and forth, Ash just kind of says, fuck it, and opens the door. Interesting thing about this scene, though, is upon first viewing of it, Ripley kind of comes across as this cold, doesn't care about the well-being of the other members of her crew. She's following the book. Doesn't matter if people die. Whereas Ash is kind of coming across as human and sympathetic, and by letting them in, he's being compassionate. But upon subsequent viewings, you already realize that really Ripley was looking out for the best of the crew, was actually displaying some heart, and Ash was the one that didn't give a damn about the crew and was just looking for his own scientific curiosity and fulfilling his directive to make sure that the alien specimen gets brought back to Weyland-Yutani. So they bring Kane into the med bay. They cut the helmet off, revealing the face hugger attached to his face. And this is where I'm going to mention the director's cut for the first time. The director's cut I kind of have a weird opinion on. I'm not real crazy about it. I don't feel like it's I still prefer the original film. The original film is just the way it's paced and everything. It's about as close to perfection as you can get in that type of film. The director's cut, I feel like there's a couple scenes that kind of they were cut for a reason. They don't necessarily need to be there. The scene with Lambert and Ripley discussing whether or not Ash has sex or anything like that. That scene, totally understandable why it was cut. Some of the there was, I think, maybe a scene or two. It's been a while since I watched the director's cut. There's a scene or two that discussed a little bit about the potential romance between Ripley and Dallas that was cut out. Stuff that you don't really necessarily need in the film. However, that being said, there's two particular scenes that are in the director's cut that I wish were in the original cut. The first one being when they're in the med bay. Ripley comes down and has a confrontation with Lambert, and Lambert slaps the ever-living shit out of her. I mean, it's apparently on set, Veronica Cartwright actually really slapped Sigourney Weaver pretty fucking hard, and that whole confrontation there I wish was in the original film. Dallas even comments that when he makes an order he expects it to be followed, and she's like, even if it's breaking quarantine, he's like, you're goddamn right. There's a big everything that happened during the airlock sequence when they went back into the ship comes to a head in this scene, and I think that scene probably could have been left in there and it wouldn't really have affected the overall pace of the film. The other scene I'll discuss when we get to it. I will say right here, right now, the whole hive sequence at the end when she finds Brett and Dallas cocooned in the director's cut, I hate that scene. I hate where it's at in that film. That scene while the scene itself isn't necessarily bad, it destroys the whole pacing of the ending of that movie. In fact, the scene itself actually takes, I think, screen time wise, the scene itself actually takes longer than what I think Ripley technically had left on the clock to get the fuck off the ship and into the Narcissus and get the hell out of there before the ship blew up. So, just putting that out there. I'm not a big fan of the hive scene in the director's cut, and being where it's at. Like I said, it's not the scene itself, it's just where it's placed in the director's cut that it just kind of ruins the pacing of the end of the film for me. So anyways, they have the helmet cut off. Kane's laying there, and they're discussing what they're going to do. They run some tests, yada, yada, yada. Try to figure out how to get this thing off of him. There's the scene, they cut the knuckle, and the acid bleeds through the, 2 levels of the ship, and then it finally stops. You already had the tension building when he went into the egg chamber. Now you're kind of getting another click on the ratchet to bring it up a notch, because you don't know what's going to happen to him. So you have a couple scenes where, they discuss what to do with Kane. Ripley and Ash have a conversation about Ash breaking quarantine. The facehugger comes off. They go in to investigate. You got Ash, Ripley, and Dallas looking for this facehugger. There's one little cheap jump scare when Dallas knocks over a trash can and scares Ripley, and eventually it falls out of the overhead area and lands on her, and Ash kind of pokes at it, and it curls up, and it's still alive. And he's like, no, it's just a reflex action. And they're examining it. And that's where this movie, one of the things that makes this movie so great is how visceral, and this is, I hate to be one of those people, but I am one of those people. Practical effects will always look better than CGI. They built this hollowed out facehugger model, laid it in a specimen tray, and for the scenes where Ash is kind of picking through it and not really dissecting it but looking at it, they have clams and mollusks and different kind of shellfish guts in there and shit like that just give it this visceral, real feeling. And when it's actually there on set, in picture, it makes that stuff feel that much more real. And it's fucking gross too. Can you imagine having one of them? Kane's still out cold. They have a discussion about freezing him. They find out that they're still 10 months out from returning to Earth. They're talking about getting back into the freezers. And then Kane wakes up. Everything seems well and good. He doesn't really have any recollection of the planet. He says he's hungry. He wants to eat before they go back into cryo sleep. So now we're at the big scene. Crew's all gathered around the table, laughing, joking, eating, and Kane starts to choke. And Ash kind of gets real serious, and he's watching him. And it's kind of, upon first viewing, you kind of think something might be off with Ash, but it's not until you watch the film subsequent times that it really kind of, you see the manipulations and the observations that he's making behind the scenes become more apparent. Kane starts convulsing. They think he's having a seizure. He's writhing around in pain. And then it happens. The big blah as the chestburster comes fucking ripping and tearing out of his body. And now, there's some misconceptions with some of the behind-the-scenes stuff. The actors kind of played it up like they didn't know what was going to happen. I think some of the things that they've said has been taken out of context. It's in the script, so they knew this alien was going to come out of John Hurt's body. They didn't know it was going to be so bloody. Veronica Cartwright actually gets, when they plow this chestburster through John Hurt's fake torso, she actually gets sprayed right in the face with a blood tube. And they didn't mean to, but she got sprayed in the face, and she, like, there was so much blood, she actually slipped and fell. And she passed out because she was so, like, shocked by the whole thing. Then they had to, like, pick her up and wake her up and get her going again. But when they filmed this scene, they said they knew something was up, that it was going to be messy, because they, like, I think it was Veronica Cartwright said that they got the set and they're like, oh, why is everybody wearing raincoats? And, like, the crew was wearing raincoats. They had plastic over everything on the cameras and shit like that. And Ridley Scott had 4 cameras going for this scene because he wanted to do it in one take, and he wanted as genuine of a reaction as you could possibly get. So when this thing comes busting out of this fake torso, and they had real entrails in there. They had real, I believe it was pig organs that they got from a butcher shop. They had those all stuffed in there and shit. So, I mean, it was pretty visceral for 1979. So their reaction was genuine, and they were shocked at how horrifying the scene was going to be. But they knew that this creature was going to come ripping out of his body. The facehugger, or not the facehugger, the chestburster you see in the movie is actually that is not a Giger design. The original Giger design kind of resembled a plucked turkey. Apparently, there's concept art on the DVDs and Blu-rays and probably floating around online. It is pretty ridiculous looking. Apparently, according to stories, Ridley Scott actually laughed his ass off when he's seen it. So, I can't remember the guy's name right now off the top of my head, but the guy that actually made some of the practical effects kind of redesigned, like, the chestburster and made, like, an amalgam of, like, kind of an embryonic state, and then merged it with the final form of the alien to get the little penis with teeth look that was in the final movie. Which, everything about this movie is, like, there's a lot of overt sexual tones, and there's a little bit more subliminal sexual tones. You have, like, the little vagina hole things on the wall inside of the derelict spaceship and in the egg chamber. The way the egg opens up, originally it only had the one slit across the top, which apparently made it look very vaginal. So then they made the cross cut to have the 4 petals to open up. You're basically being raped by a creature that, when it has its underbelly exposed, looks pretty vag looking, with a proboscis that's kind of like getting a wang shoved down your throat. The whole design of the alien has all kinds of sexual overtones to it. Then just the nature of how the face or the chestburster looks when it comes out. I mean, it's just like, it taps into things that make people uncomfortable, and that's what H.R. Giger is very good at, and that's why he was perfect for designing this alien world for this movie. But anyways, they have the funeral for Kane, and then they kind of decide what they're going to do to try to catch this thing. So they get some nets and some cattle prods and stuff, because mind you, they still think it's this little teeny tiny penis snake running around. So they break off into teams. Parker, Brett, and Ripley are on a team, and they pick up some motion on their motion tracker. And this is what this movie does well, and this is why the pacing of this movie is so important, is once that chestburster comes out of John Hurt, the tension gets ratcheted up as high as it can go, and it basically stays there. Like, you don't really have a moment to relax from that scene on. They get the motion tracker going. They think they found it. They're getting ready to close in on it. They open up the locker, and it's the cat. And the cat gets away because Brett's like, it's a cat. So the cat gets away. They tell Brett to go get the cat since he let it escape. So Brett goes after the cat. And this is where the other scene that I wish was in the film from the director's cut is, as he's walking through this unknown part of the ship with all these chains hanging and there's water dripping down. There's a shot in the director's cut that is fucking beautiful. The camera pans up. You see these chains. And at a glance, you don't know what it is. But if you know what you're looking for, you can see the alien just kind of balled up hanging from this chain. And it's perfect because it shows how this creature can blend into this environment. This is where a lot of modern like monster movies and horror movies go wrong. Brett's trying to get this cat. So it's coming out and it kind of starts like, it's kind of careful, like it knows the alien's there. And behind Brett, you can see the tail kind of come down. And then eventually the whole alien comes down. And it's out of focus, just enough that you're not quite sure what you're looking at. Brett, the cat, starts to freak out. Brett realizes something's behind him. He turns around and there's this alien. You don't see the whole thing. They zoom in on the face as it's like, you know, getting all pissy and getting ready to fucking shove its second jaw through his head. But that's the mastery of this film. One, it's because it's a product of its time. And two, showing your monster from head to toe the very first time it's on screen is a mistake. Things that you can't see, letting the audience piece in what they can't see with their mind makes the film far scarier than anything you can show them. Now, don't get me wrong, the creature is a nightmarish looking thing that they could have showed it probably in full light from head to toe and it'd still be scary as fuck just because of the design of it. But that's the mastery of Ridley Scott in this film. You don't see it in direct light. You don't see too many full body shots, and it's always kind of hidden. Like, you never know the full size of this thing, the full scope of this thing, and you never get a good enough shot to really kind of know exactly what it looks like. And even in the next scene, which I'm just going to play.
Whatever it was big. And
You sure took him into the air shaft?
Disappeared into one of the cooling ducts.
no question, it's using the air ducts to move around.
Could he want Brett alive?
What?
Could Brett be alive?
No. I mean, I don't think so.
No. This air shaft may work to our advantage. Here it leads up to and comes out in the main airlock. All right, there's only one big opening along the way. We can cover that up, and then we drive it into the airlock and zap it into outer space.
This son of a bitch is huge. I mean, it's like a man. It's big.
Kane's son.
Yaphet Kotto nailed this part. His whole character. And having this guy just the way he talks about it. Like, he's like, I don't know what the fuck it is. Probably the next, really memorable scene. At least as far as like just keeping that tension going. The claustrophobia of the environment of the Nostromo. And just like edge of your seat, nail biting, like what the fuck is going to happen is when they finally decide that it's using the air vents. So somebody's got to go into the air vents, maybe try to flush it out. So Dallas goes into the air vents, and you're kind of thinking, well, nothing's going to happen to Dallas. He's the captain. The captain always lives. And this is where, as the scene progresses, that you kind of realize you don't know who's going to be the protagonist, who's going to come out of this in the end. Especially, in 1979, none of these people except Tom Skerritt were really big actors. Yaphet Kotto just came off of Live and Let Die, but I mean, off the top of my head, I mean, Sigourney Weaver wasn't what, she wasn't the Sigourney Weaver that people knew from like Ghostbusters and things like that. And so you didn't have these you didn't have this clear cut like Survivor. So Dallas is in the air vents or the air ducts. They know it's in there. It finally pops up on the motion tracker. They're trying to get him out of there, but avoid the alien. Obviously, he ends up getting captured or killed, or obviously he runs into the alien, and that's that. Which then they say, no blood, no Dallas. They don't know what happened, but he's not there. So then we have a few different scenes where things are kind of everything. Your last act is getting established. Ripley's taking on this leadership role. Parker just wants to kill this fucking thing. And this is where Ripley's character really kind of shines, because she has to keep Parker level. She has to keep him from just like, fuck it, I'm going out there and killing this thing. She has to keep Lambert from just completely losing her shit, freaking out and sitting in the corner and crying. And she's got this antagonistic thing that's kind of been there since the airlock sequence when Ash let Kane in, still going on with Ash. So then we have the scene with she has access to Mother. She finds out the crew's expendable. Her and Ash have a little bit of a conflict. There was supposed to be a scene there where Parker finds the alien next to the airlock and he wants to vent it. And he contacts Lambert. They try to vent it. Ripley shows up and an alarm goes off. Scares the alien. The alien actually gets its tail caught in the airlock door. Cuts off part of its tail. Its blood eats a hole through the hull, decompresses the area, and that was supposed to be the explanation for Ripley's bloody nose during the Ash scene when he freaks out and starts sweating milk. That scene wasn't included for... I don't even think they filmed it. They partially filmed it, I think, but that scene wasn't included, which would have ruined the pacing, because having the confrontation between Ash and Ripley in the Mother room, and then having the scene where Ash flips shit and deals with them and gives Parker the fucking titty twister and they knock his head off like that, having that airlock sequence in between those two scenes wouldn't have worked. So they figure out that they're just going to blow the ship. They'll take their chances with the shuttle. They got to start prepping for that. Parker and Lambert end up getting killed, which I will say that Parker's character shows some incredible restraint, because I'm pretty sure anybody holding a flamethrower with a 7-foot tall alien between you and somebody else probably would have fried that motherfucker. But he ended up trying to save Lambert and just gets his head squished in the process, so it didn't work out so well for him. Probably should have just fried it, but it is what it is. There's some debate over what the alien actually did to Lambert. Some people think it just killed her pretty violently. Some people think it, like, raped her with its tail or whatever. Kill fucked her. I don't know what the fuck they want to call it. But interestingly, the shot of the alien snaking its tail between her legs, those are actually Brett's legs from when they trimmed down his death for the final release of the film. Those two characters die and Ripley's left alone. She gets the cat. She tries to deactivate the self-destruct sequence because the alien's blocking her path to the shuttle. Like, that whole thing there flows so well by itself that having that scene where she finds the hive just kind of disrupts that, I feel. You know, you're free to disagree with me, but to me, that whole progression from Parker and Lambert's death to Ripley getting to the ship and getting the fuck out of Dodge before the ship explodes, that to me just flows good. You're gonna blow the ship, you know she has to get the hell out of there. The alien's blocking her path, so now she's got to try to disarm the self-destruct sequence. She tries that, doesn't work, so now she's got to try to get back to the ship, or to the shuttle, and hope that the alien isn't there. That just, to me, that just works better without having that scene interruption by having that hive sequence. If they would have had it earlier in the movie, maybe it wouldn't have bothered me. But putting that in there in the director's cut, like I said, maybe I'm kind of harping on this too much, but it just breaks the pacing of that for me. So she gets onto the shuttle. Narcissus takes off. The Nostromo blows. Happy ending. Everything's all taken care of. She's sitting there, and when you first see it, you don't notice it. When you watch the movie subsequent times, you notice it. But the alien's like right in front of her, just like kind of chilling in the wall. And its hand comes out and scares her, and she has to try to get this thing off the shuttle. And the one thing I want to talk about with this scene is some people have made the argument that by having her, it starts off real quiet. She thinks she's good. She's gonna get the fuck out of here. She's safe. She lived. She starts undressing to go back into cryo sleep. And some people have made the argument that by having her in like a white tank top and her underwear, that they're sexualizing the character of Ripley, but to me, that's just like carrying on the theme that this movie is basically like using that fear of like, I guess for lack of a better term, using that fear of like sexual assault and things like that. She's at a moment where she thinks she's safe. She's comfortable. She's getting ready to go back into cryosleep. And boom, there's the alien. And it, to me, watching it, not once have I ever sat there and been like, oh, Sigourney Weaver butt, you know, or anything like that. It's not like she's wearing a thong and a fucking corset or anything like that. She's in a fucking tank top and some just like regular white underwear. I don't... To me, that's not a sexualization scene. They're not trying to be like, look at Sigourney Weaver's ass or anything like that. She gets into the spacesuit, buckles into a chair, opens the door, or well, she gets the alien to come out of where it's hiding by using like a steam blast or something to vent into there and get it out. She opens up the door, shoots up the harpoon gun, it goes out, the door closes, the harpoon gun's still inside with the alien hanging outside the door. It crawls into the engine, she activates the engines, blasts it off. Now we have our true ending. Originally, Ridley Scott had contemplated making an ending where the alien gets back onto the shuttle before the doors close and rips Ripley's head off, and then sends out a distress beacon using Dallas's voice, like it was talking and sounded like Dallas. Apparently Fox did not like that at all and actually sent like a studio executive like a day later, showed up at the set and was like, you will be fired if you film that ending. So then they made it, he eventually was like, yeah, you know, the Ripley surviving ending was much better. So Prometheus, stuff that happened in Prometheus and Alien Covenant, it's not like Ridley Scott never had bad ideas. They just had people that were like, don't follow through with that bad idea. Apparently those people weren't around for Prometheus and Alien Covenant. Now, this is a film that has always been close to me. I've loved this movie forever, ever since I first seen it. There are some minor problems that you could nitpick in the movie. Some, you know, the thing like I said with during Lambert's death, like the shot of the alien tail going around the legs is actually Brett's legs. They reused a shot of the acid hole in the ceiling for both decks. A couple other things. There's like this weird audio cutout when they're trying to get back into the ship and Lambert's like yelling at Ripley, and it's like, is that intentional or is that like shit's going to hell and some of their equipment's not up to snuff? And you know, I mean, there's some weird things. The prosthetics for the Ian Holm head for when they're talking to Ash after he gets decapitated, there's a really bad cut there where it's like Ian Holm's head through the table, really bad prosthetic head. But I mean, outside of that stuff, I mean, that's just being nitpicky. As a whole, I would say that movie has definitely stood the test of time. To this day, it still looks fucking fantastic. It's my favorite in the franchise by far. I mean, you could argue back and forth between the creature in this film and the creatures in the second movie, but I think this is the best looking of the creatures that were in any of the films. It acts a lot different than what they did. They kind of, this one was a little bit more slower, methodical. They kind of speed them up a little bit in subsequent movies. There's reasons why this movie is in top 10 lists. It's on the 1001 movies you must see before you die. Things like that. It's just the cast that they brought together just worked well together. Everybody played their parts extremely well. Like I said, Yaphet Kotto really stood out as Parker. Obviously, Sigourney Weaver stood out as Ripley. Ian Holm did some things that you don't notice the first time you watch it, and then as you watch it again and again, you start picking up on little things that's like, huh, yeah, there's definitely not something right with that motherfucker. The designs, it was not this nice, sparkly science fiction world. It was a science fiction world that kind of was believable. It wasn't very far-fetched. It was basically like, I mean, when they say it's space truckers, they're fucking space truckers. Like I said, you know, there's little details showing these people lived in this world. leaving the coffee cups out, the tape on the seats that I mentioned, things like that. So the characters all had like their little things, like if you look in, like you can see on the walls, like in their little like domiciles or sleeping areas, that like some of the guys had like centerfolds up on the walls, and like Brett built model clipper ships that can be, you can see them behind him in his bridge station. They call it not a domicile, bridge station or sleeping quarters, and also in the engineering base. So that was kind of cool. Like these were things that just made it that much more believable and more human. So then when they went to LV-426, which it wasn't called LV-426 in the movie, when you see that derelict ship and when they're inside of it, that alien atmosphere and architecture and everything, like, just contrasts it so much. A lot of these things that are in this movie, have influenced other films, video games, things like that. I mean, obviously there's been Alien games. Alien Isolation was about as close to this movie as you can get. And none of the other films in the franchise really came back to this formula that worked so well in this movie. Alien 3, I guess, kind of tried, but it never... That's a whole different story. Event Horizon, Paul W.S. Anderson's one of his early movies, probably his only movie that I actually like, apes a lot of what happened in, like, the atmosphere and the tension that's in Alien. He kind of borrowed that for Event Horizon, which then he fucked up when he made Alien versus Predator. But again, that's another story. Just that this is a movie that's kind of like all the different... There's not one particular thing that makes this movie stand out above the rest. It's just a combination of elements. It's the perfect storm of elements that came together and made one of the greatest, if not the greatest, science fiction horror movies ever released. Today's movies, they would have just started with the alien running around fucking murdering people. It's just something like this just cannot exist in this day and age with what studios think the movie-going audience wants. And it's a shame, because there is a place in modern cinema for films like this to exist in new ways, and everybody just wants to get to... They don't want to have these slow burns anymore. They just want to blow their wad and get it over with as quickly as possible and cash their paychecks. For some reason, filmmakers think that for these kind of, like, I guess you could classify Alien as a slasher film to an extent, but movies like this in this day and age, they think that the audience just wants all the slashing and the payoff, but without the build-up, without building the world, without getting people drawn into the world, without getting them into the characters and caring about the characters. This movie's almost Hitchcockian in nature. It kind of... The bomb under the table scene, in this, in Alien, the bomb under the table never goes off. Whereas movies made nowadays, the bomb goes off immediately. That's probably the best way I can sum that up. Anyways, I've been going on and on long enough, so I'm going to wrap this up. And, just let me know. Want to do more stuff like this? Did I take too long in certain parts? Did I not flesh out enough? Did I gloss over stuff that maybe I should have went more in depth with? Did I go more in depth with stuff that I shouldn't have gone in depth with? Let me know, and I'll work on it. This is something I do like, talking about movies. I do like discussing films. So, you guys, feedback is only going to make me better at it. So I want to thank you guys for taking the time to watch, and we'll see you in the next one. Have a good one.